And then the Greek phalanx began to push. Slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. Spears stabbed forward, shields pressed against Persian ranks, feet driving the line forward. The Persians wavered under the relentless pressure, gaps opening as men fell, horses tired, and the cohesion of their formation strained. The Greek soldiers pressed the advantage, exploiting every weakness their disciplined eyes could detect. The plains of Plataea had become the stage for one of the greatest examples of martial discipline ever seen. The weapons they carried, the bodies they honed, the minds they trained, all coalesced into a force that was nearly irresistible. And though the fight was far from over, the Greeks had proven something critical. Preparation, discipline, and unity could turn the tide against even the most formidable of armies. The sun had climbed high over Plataea, turning the plain into a furnace. Dust and smoke hung in the air, mixing with the coppery scent of blood and the acrid tang of sweat and scorched leather. The Greek phalanx had held the line, withstood charge after charge, and now began to advance in coordinated waves, pressing relentlessly into the Persian formations. Spears jabbed in perfect unison, shields pushed forward like walls of bronze, and step by step, the Greeks reclaimed the ground they had defended for days. Pausanias moved along the line, his eyes sharp, reading the battlefield as he had trained for years. His orders were quiet, precise, delivered through officers who repeated them without hesitation. Every Greek soldier understood the moment. They were not simply fighting for survival. They were striking decisively to end the Persian threat once and for all. The Persians, though numerous, began to falter. Cavalry had been neutralized by terrain and Greek discipline. Archers were hemmed in, their volleys bouncing off shields or striking men already dead. Infantry could not hold the phalanx's steady pressure. Lines that had once seemed endless began to fracture under the relentless, coordinated thrust of bronze and iron. Greek soldiers pushed into the Persian center. Spears met shields, swords clashed against armor, and men grappled in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The training and discipline of the Greeks shone in every movement. They fought not as individuals, but as one body, each man knowing that failure meant not just death, but the collapse of every comrade beside him. Slowly, the Persian lines broke, soldiers fleeing in panic as the Greeks surged forward, relentless. Mardonius rode among his remaining troops, shouting orders, urging cohesion, but the panic was contagious. Units scattered, commanders were cut down, and the vast Persian force became a chaotic mass of retreating soldiers and horses. Greek archers and slingers picked off stragglers. Spear points struck at those attempting to regroup, and the field became a relentless tide of slaughter. The moment of decisive victory came when Pausanias ordered the final push into the Persian camp. Soldiers stormed tents, slashed at fleeing men, captured banners, and claimed the enemy's weapons. Horses bolted, banners fell, and the Persian army collapsed into disorder. No longer a threat, but a desperate, broken remnant. Mardonius himself barely escaped, retreating east with the few troops he could rally as the day wore on. The battlefield became a silent testament to the cost of the fight. Thousands of Persian soldiers lay strewn across the plains, their armor dented, spears broken, and banners trampled into the mud. Greek soldiers moved through the aftermath, tending to the wounded, collecting the dead, and binding their own injuries. Though victorious, the cost was etched into every face, every scar, every shattered shield. The victory at Plataea was not just a tactical success. It was the culmination of decades of preparation, discipline, and unity. Greek infantry had faced the greatest army the world had ever seen and had prevailed through sheer training, cohesion, and courage. The lessons of Thermopylae and the long retreat from the north had not been in vain. Every spear, every shield, every drop of sweat that had been spent on years of drilling and forging weapons now bore fruit in the form of survival and triumph. As evening fell, the surviving Greek soldiers gathered atop the hills, looking over the plains of Plataea. The Persians had been defeated, the immediate threat to Greece ended, and the coalition of city-states had proved that together they could stand against even the most formidable enemy. Yet even in victory, there was a solemn recognition of what had been lost. Families, cities, and lives had been destroyed in the conflict, and the scars of war would linger for generations. Pausanias walked among the men quietly, surveying the field, and for a moment, the shadow of Leonidas seemed to linger over them. The lesson of courage, discipline, and unity that the fallen Spartan king had embodied now lived in every surviving soldier on that plain. Greece had survived, not because of a single heroic stand, but because men had been trained to fight as one, to endure, and to wield their weapons with deadly precision. The Battle of Plataea would be remembered for centuries as the moment when Greek civilization proved its resilience, when the lessons of war, the rigor of training, and the unyielding spirit of its people overcame the seemingly unstoppable might of Persia. And though the plains were silent now, except for the moans of the wounded and the whispers of the wind through the trampled grass, the memory of that day, the unity, the discipline, the sheer determination, would echo through history forever. Greece had won. The invaders had been turned back, and the men who had stood, fought, and survived Plataea had forged a legacy that no empire, no fire, no army could ever erase. The war had ended not with a legend of a few, but with the disciplined strength of many, a civilization proving that preparation, unity, and courage could defy even the greatest threat the ancient world had ever seen. The sun set over Plataea, casting long shadows over the plain, illuminating the shattered banners, the gleaming bronze shields, and the enduring spirit of a people who had fought not just for land, but for the very heart of their civilization. And somewhere in the distance, the ghosts of those who had fallen, Spartans, Athenians, Tegeans, Plataeans, seemed to watch silently, knowing that the story of Greece had survived because they had endured, because they had fought, because they had refused to break. The plains grew quiet, and the war that had begun with fire and fear ended in the unyielding discipline of men who had trained their bodies, sharpened their weapons, and steeled their minds for this one, decisive day. Greece had been saved, and the echoes of Plataea would never be forgotten. But beyond the body, the mind needed shaping. War was chaos, but the Greeks treated it like a science. Soldiers were taught to observe the terrain, to read the enemy's formations, to anticipate movement, to understand the flow of battle before it began. Camps were meticulously organized, with kitchens, water stations, armories, and supply depots functioning like small cities. Messengers ran tirelessly, conveying orders, repeating instructions, clarifying positions. Every soldier knew not only his role, but the roles of his neighbors, understanding that survival depended not just on individual bravery, but on the flawless execution of a collective strategy. Coordination drills were brutal and exhaustive. Columns practiced flanking, counterflanking, and formation changes at the sound of a trumpet or a shouted command. Soldiers learned to react instantly, to adapt to shifting positions without breaking the line, to trust in the rhythm of the phalanx. Units moved in synchronized patterns, simulating charges, retreats, and encirclements. The drills pushed both body and mind, teaching anticipation, discipline, and a kind of quiet aggression that could erupt at any moment. Even daily life was designed to maintain readiness. Sleep was limited, food rationed to maximize endurance and minimize waste. Hygiene simplified to reduce vulnerability. Men carried out repetitive tasks to strengthen hands, arms, and shoulders, rolling logs, carrying water, sharpening weapons, all while wearing armor to simulate the physical burden of battle. Each day, each repetition, each ache and strain pushed them closer to becoming soldiers who could act in perfect unison under the unimaginable stress of combat. And yet, preparation alone was not enough. Fear had to be tamed. Soldiers were exposed to small, controlled chaos. Mock skirmishes, sudden attacks during drills, night exercises under darkness with only torches flickering, forcing them to respond without panic. The Greek warrior's mind had to be as honed as his spear, as enduring as his shield, capable of decision under pressure where hesitation meant death. could be by the time the army of Plataea reached the final days before battle. The soldiers were no longer raw citizens or regional militias. They were an organism of bronze, wood, leather, and iron. Every limb knew the rhythm of combat. Every nerve could sense the flow of battle. Every man trusted the soldier beside him implicitly. Weapon, shield, body, mind. They were united in purpose, sharpened through preparation, molded by endurance, and disciplined by fearlessness. When a moment of slaughter came, they would not falter because every aspect of their lives had been built, hammered, and trained for that single purpose: to fight, to survive, and to strike as one against the armies that threatened their homeland. The sun rose over the plains, and the army moved as a single shadow of bronze and crimson. Every drill, every hardship, every lesson about endurance and weapon mastery coming alive as the final rehearsal before the storm of Plataea. As dawn stretched. Across the plains of Plataea, the Greek army formed a dense, unbroken line of bronze and crimson, shields locking with shields, spears pointing outward like a forest of sharpened reeds. The ground beneath them was hard and uneven, the terrain chosen carefully to blunt the speed of cavalry. But still, the tension in the air was electric, each soldier feeling the weight of the hours spent training, forging weapons, and conditioning body and mind. Across the plain, the Persian army gleamed in the morning light, a glittering wave of thousands of men, horses, and banners stretching to the horizon, cavalry circling, infantry bristling with long spears, archers drawing strings taut as bowstrings hummed in unison. The first clash began almost imperceptibly. Persian archers loosed volleys across the distance, the arrows whistling through the air. Greek shields absorbed the first few dozen, bronze ringing with the impact, some arrows embedding themselves, others bouncing harmlessly. Soldiers knelt, braced, and returned fire with sling stones or arrows of their own. But this was merely the prelude. Then the cavalry moved. Thousands of horses, hooves tearing into the earth, approached with terrifying precision. Mecistius had fallen, but the Persian riders were disciplined, spreading into lines meant to test the flanks of the Greek formation. Spears braced, shields angled, the soldiers held their positions, drilled for years in this exact moment. The first charge struck against the Greek phalanx, the impact like a hammer smashing into stone. Horses reared, riders fell, soldiers grunted, shields splintered, and the ground shook beneath the weight of combat. The Greeks did not break. Each unit pressed tighter, the shield walls absorbing the shock, the spears thrusting outward to pierce riders and horses alike. Soldiers moved in unison, stepping forward in perfect rhythm to counter the momentum of the Persian cavalry. Every drill, every day spent mastering the weight of bronze and iron, every moment of exhausting endurance training now became instinct. Men did not think, they acted. The formation shifted as one, like a single living creature, closing gaps, reinforcing weak points, countering each charge. Close combat erupted where spears met the enemy. Greek swords flashed in the sun, short, deadly strokes aimed at gaps in armor, over shoulders, under arms. The Persians wielded long, curved swords and javelins, striking with reach and agility, but the Greeks were prepared. Training drilled into them how to maintain cohesion under pressure, how to step aside and thrust in, how to protect themselves and each other. Helots and allied infantry pushed from behind, carrying fresh weapons, tending the wounded, reinforcing shields. The battle became a grinding machine of bodies, metal, and sweat. Spears splintered, swords bent, shields cracked, and yet the phalanx held. Soldiers shouted commands over the din. Trumpet calls punctuated the chaos. Messengers ran back and forth with orders and corrections. Every man relied on the rhythm of his comrades, every shield a lifeline, every spear thrust a declaration of survival. Horses fell. Riders were thrown. Blood slicked the ground, mixing with dust, sweat, and mud. The smell of iron, of heated bronze, of scorched leather, and of blood hung heavy in the air. Greek archers continued to rain arrows into the flanks, Small units pressed forward to exploit any weakness, and yet the Persians did not falter completely. They adapted, shifted, and pressed where the Greeks had opened themselves slightly, testing the limits of the phalanx. The sun climbed higher, baking the soldiers in armor, making every movement a struggle. Yet they endured. Hours passed, a relentless series of charges and countercharges, a deadly dance where hesitation meant death, where every small error could shatter the line. But the Greeks had been trained for endurance, for coordination, for the moment when everything depended on muscle memory and instinct. Meanwhile, the Persian commanders realized something critical. The Greeks did not fight as individuals. They fought as one. Every attempt to break the line was met with synchronized resistance, spear points closing gaps before riders could exploit them, shields reinforcing each other like interlocking bricks. The Persian cavalry, powerful and fast, could not achieve decisive penetration without enormous losses. Each failed charge only strengthened the Greek morale. By mid-morning, the battlefield was a tapestry of chaos. Horses, soldiers, broken shields, discarded helmets, and blood-smeared earth covered the plain. The Greeks, though battered and sweating, remained largely unbroken. Their training, their weapons, their coordination, and their unshakable discipline turned the Persian advantage of cavalry and numbers into a grind of attrition. Every blow absorbed, every strike returned. Every unit holding its position became a testament to the centuries of preparation that had brought them to this single, decisive fight. Amid the carnage, Pausanias moved along the line, observing, issuing quiet commands, reinforcing weak points. His officers relayed instructions with precision. Even in the chaos of combat, the order drilled into these men remained intact. They moved as a single organism, one thought, one body, one unstoppable will. The mental conditioning was just as grueling as the physical. Soldiers were trained to endure fear, to suppress panic, and to focus solely on the orders and the movement of their unit. Exhaustion, thirst, and hunger were constant companions, and yet each day they pushed further, drilled harder, and forced their minds to accept pain as routine. Even the harshest injuries were met with determination, taught from a young age in Sparta and mirrored, in different ways, across the Greek city-states. Every tool, every weapon, every formation was a product of this relentless preparation. By the time the next great battle arrived, these men were no longer ordinary citizens. They were perfected instruments of war. Their bodies were trained to resist fatigue, their minds to resist fear, their units to act as a single organism. They knew the cost of failure, the importance of every movement, and the value of unity. In the fields of Plataea and beyond, this combination of skill, discipline, and endurance would determine not just victory or defeat, but the survival of Greek civilization itself. The legacy of training and preparation extended beyond the battlefield. Artisans continued to refine weapon design. Engineers strengthened fortifications, and officers studied the movements of past armies to learn from every victory and failure. Greece's survival depended on this cycle: relentless training, perfect execution, and the constant push to improve. In the shadow of Plataea, every soldier understood that their discipline was not only their shield but the shield of the cities, the phalanx of a civilization determined to endure. Before the dawn, the army gathered on the open fields again, not for battle yet, but for the preparation that made victory possible. The ground shook beneath tens of thousands of feet as men fell into formation, shields touching shields, spears angled just so. Every movement was practiced, repeated, corrected, until muscle memory became instinct. Young soldiers ran between the lines, carrying messages, adjusting positions, and learning the rhythm of the phalanx. Veterans drilled relentlessly, correcting stances, demanding sharper spear angles, tighter shield walls, and unbreakable cohesion. The weapons themselves were extensions of the body. Spears were gripped in firm hands, the wood polished smooth, the iron tips honed to a deadly point. Swords, light enough to strike quickly but heavy enough to crush bone. were swung in precise arcs again and again, cutting through the air, striking targets, and striking at the confidence of those wielding them until perfection was reached. Shields were leveled, angled, rotated to cover the gaps, to absorb blows, and to push the enemy without losing balance. Armor clanged and shifted as soldiers moved, and every jolt, every weight, trained the body to endure the stress of real combat. Physical training was relentless. Soldiers ran across hills, carrying stones, dragging weighted sleds, pushing logs in synchronized drills. Muscles burned, lungs ached, and sweat poured into eyes. Yet each man continued. Strength alone was not enough. Speed, flexibility, and endurance were as essential as the ability to withstand pain. Men practiced falling, rolling, and recovering, simulating the chaos of real engagement so that fear could never paralyze them. Pain became familiar, routine, a constant companion that hardened body and mind alike. Equally important were the tactical exercises. Small groups moved in precise maneuvers, testing formations, practicing flanks, retreats, and countercharges. Commands were shouted and repeated, then tested under exhaustion. Soldiers learned to anticipate the movements of comrades, to trust the rhythm of the phalanx, and to react as one organism rather than as individuals. Even the slightest hesitation was corrected, for in the heat of battle, a fraction of a second could mean 1,000 deaths. Discipline was drilled as rigorously as combat skills. Soldiers were ordered to stand in silence for hours, weapons ready, observing the smallest details of terrain and enemy positioning. Messengers ran tirelessly between units, their stamina pushed to the limit, because communication could be the difference between order and chaos. Camps were structured like miniature cities of war, with kitchens, armories, and training grounds all functioning under strict routines. Every soldier knew his role, his responsibility, and the consequences of failure. Night brought no respite, while fires burned low and guards patrolled. Many soldiers practiced quietly, shadowing movements, adjusting grips, rehearsing thrusts, and honing skills in dim light to simulate the confusion of battle. Sleep came in short, precious bursts, always under the strain of knowing that the next day could bring death. Through these days, the army transformed. Raw recruits became disciplined warriors. Scattered allies became a coordinated force. Every aspect of their bodies, every motion of their weapons, and every thought of their minds was sharpened for one purpose: the field of battle. When Plataea finally called them forward, they would not fight as separate contingents or hesitant citizens. They would strike as one unstoppable phalanx, perfected by sweat, blood, and the endless discipline that had been the backbone of Greek warfare for generations. The preparation of the Greek army went far beyond marching in formation or swinging a sword. Every weapon they carried had been shaped by the hands of skilled craftsmen, men who understood that the difference between life and death could be a fraction of an inch, a fraction of a second, or a single flaw in metal. Spears were carved from straight, supple wood, often ash or cornel, chosen for its balance of flexibility and strength. Each shaft was shaved smooth, sanded, and polished, then tempered with oil to preserve the grain and prevent splintering. The tips, forged from iron, were hammered again and again, folded and heated, ground, and sharpened until they could pierce armor or bone with almost surgical precision. The weight of the spear, its balance, and the way it rested against the shoulder were all considered, ensuring that a soldier could thrust, parry, and pivot without losing momentum. Shields were more than protection. They were weapons, platforms of offense, and symbols of cohesion. Constructed from thick planks of wood, often layered and bound with bronze rims, each shield was tested under blows from sledgehammers and axes, trained repeatedly under mock assaults to see how it could withstand pressure. Leather coverings were stretched tight across the face to absorb impact. Bronze bosses were centered to deliver crushing blows, and straps were adjusted so that the shield could move fluidly with the arm while remaining an immovable wall in the phalanx. Young men were drilled for hours just in handling the shields, lifting, rotating, pushing, angling to deflect, always in sync with the men on either side, until it became instinctive. No thought, no hesitation, just perfect coordination. Swords, though secondary to the spear in formation fighting, demanded a different kind of mastery. They were lighter, faster, deadly in close quarters. Smiths forged them from iron, folding and refolding the metal to create blades that were strong yet flexible. Handles were wrapped in leather, providing grip even in the heat of battle when hands were slick with blood or sweat. Soldiers practiced every type of swing: overhand, underhand, side slashes, thrusts, and feints. They struck targets, breaking through wooden dummies, shields, and leather-bound poles, learning the weight and momentum of each blade. Every swing, every parry, every thrust was repeated hundreds of times a day until the motion became a part of their body, like breathing. Physical conditioning was relentless, bordering on cruel. Soldiers ran barefoot across hills, dragging weighted sleds, lifting heavy stones, or carrying logs twice their weight. Agility and endurance were as critical as raw strength. Young men fell during exercises, rolled, scrambled back to their feet, pushed onward until exhaustion threatened to collapse them. Pain was constant. Hunger was controlled. Every drill was designed to simulate the strain of real combat, teaching the body to fight even when every muscle screamed in protest, to remain standing when fear and fatigue demanded collapse. Strength alone was meaningless without resilience. Pain became a companion, discipline the path, endurance the reward. The story of Plataea reminds all of Greece that survival requires more than weapons. It requires vision, cooperation, and an understanding of the past. The blood that was shed there feeds a culture of learning, art, and governance. And the echoes of that day continue to shape not only battles yet to come, but the very character of a people who will forever measure themselves against the standards set on that sun-scorched plain. The legacy is complete. Plataea is no longer just a battle. It is a lesson, a symbol, a foundation for the classical age, and a beacon guiding the Greek world through both triumphs and trials for generations to come. After Plataea, Greece understood that survival depended on more than courage. It required preparation. Every city-state began to examine its armies with meticulous attention. Blacksmiths and artisans worked day and night, refining the shape and balance of spears, ensuring that the bronze tips would pierce armor without bending. Shields were tested, hammered, and reforged until they could withstand repeated blows from axes and swords. Swords themselves were polished to razor edges, their weight and balance measured, so that a single swing could disable an opponent before he could strike back. Armor became a science, layers of bronze and leather carefully cut and joined to protect vital points while allowing freedom of movement. The joints reinforced with chainmail and rivets hammered to perfection. But tools alone were useless without bodies trained to wield them. Soldiers rose before dawn, running over uneven terrain until their legs burned, their lungs ached, and their hearts pumped as if they might burst. They carried weights, logs, and packs filled with stones to strengthen their shoulders, their backs, and their arms, practicing the motions of thrusting a spear, raising a shield, or swinging a sword until every action became instinctive. They wrestled, sparred, and fell again and again, learning how to absorb blows, counterattacks, and recover quickly. Every bruise and scar was a lesson in endurance, every failure a step toward mastery. Discipline was as crucial as strength. Soldiers drilled in precise formations, moving as one across rocky hills and muddy fields, learning how to lock shields, step together, and maintain lines under pressure. The phalanx was more than a tactic. It was a moving wall of iron and bronze, a machine powered by hundreds of coordinated men who trusted the man beside them with their lives. Mistakes were punished, not to instill fear, but to ensure that hesitation would never break the line in the heat of battle. Each city-state had its own style, reflecting its culture. Spartans were molded from childhood in the agoge, their lives a continuous test of endurance, strength, and loyalty. Their bodies were honed to withstand pain, their minds trained to obey without question, and their combat skills refined through relentless practice. Athenians, while less regimented, emphasized flexibility and ingenuity, training with a variety of weapons and tactics, encouraging soldiers to think and adapt even while maintaining cohesion in the phalanx. Corinthian and Theban soldiers brought their own specialties: lighter armor for faster movement, specialized spears, and cavalry tactics that could complement or exploit gaps in enemy lines. Weapons were not only tools but symbols of identity. Every spear and shield carried the marks of its maker, and every soldier learned the history of the arms he carried. The spear was more than a point of attack. It was the embodiment of strategy, reach, and protection. The shield was both defense and a standard to rally around, polished to reflect sunlight in a manner that could intimidate advancing enemies. Armor was a declaration. This man has trained, endured, and is prepared to face death to defend his people. Training was unending. Even when armies were not marching to war, they drilled. Formations moved across fields and hills, coordinated attacks and retreats repeated until instinct overcame thought. Physical endurance, mental toughness, and tactical precision became inseparable. Soldiers learned to fight at dawn and dusk, in the rain and under the summer sun, until exhaustion itself was no longer a weakness but a tool, a measure of how much more one could endure than an enemy. Weapons, armor, and training together created a force that could challenge even the most overwhelming adversaries. Every soldier became a weapon in his own right, his body and mind sharpened to a point where hesitation could mean death not only for himself but for those standing beside him. The preparation was grueling, almost relentless, but ensured that when the next war came, Greece would be ready, not just to survive, but to dominate, to turn fear into strategy and strategy into victory. It was in this period of preparation that the foundations of the classical Greek military ethos were solidified. Relentless physical conditioning, flawless weapon craftsmanship, and the unbreakable discipline of the phalanx, all forged in the memory of Plataea and the fire of survival days. And the military camps became a world unto themselves. Soldiers awoke before dawn, muscles stiff and bodies aching from the previous day's exertion, and immediately began drills that tested every part of their strength and endurance. Running across uneven terrain, carrying heavy packs, dragging logs, lifting stones, and practicing spear thrusts until their shoulders burned and hands blistered became routine. Meals were simple, often barely enough to sustain them, but hunger was a teacher. It sharpened focus, hardened resolve, and reminded every man that survival depended on discipline, not indulgence. Camp life was harsh. Tents were cramped, and personal space was almost non-existent. Orders were constant, shouted over the morning wind, or hammered into soldiers during drills. Any lapse in discipline was punished quickly, harshly, and without public shame, for the purpose of survival. Each man learned to obey instinctively, to act as a part of a larger machine where hesitation could shatter the formation. Sleep was scarce, and even then, soldiers trained their minds to rest lightly, always aware of the sounds of approaching enemies or the subtle warning of a scout's call. Weapons and armor were extensions of the soldier himself. Spears were polished until their tips could split a shield, weighted so that a man could thrust repeatedly without faltering. Shields were not just for protection but for offense, used to push, block, and control the enemy's movements. Swords were sharpened daily, their edges a promise of death to any who challenged the phalanx. Helmets and breastplates were hammered and tested relentlessly, with weak points reinforced and joints oiled so they would move smoothly in combat. The soldier's body became part of this system, trained to wield weapons with lethal precision, to withstand pain, and to act without hesitation. Training was never only physical. Strategy and tactics were drilled as often as strength. Commanders instructed soldiers in the movements of the phalanx, the timing of a flanking maneuver, the signal for advancing or retreating, the coordination required to turn a unit in unison under the stress of battle. Young soldiers studied maps, terrain, and enemy habits, learning to anticipate maneuvers and think several steps ahead, even while blood and sweat tested the limits of their endurance. Knowledge of terrain, weather, and the enemy became as vital as the strength of their arms. Because in war, a misstep could kill hundreds. Camps were also schools for unity. Soldiers learned to trust the man beside them, to read the subtle cues in posture and movement, to cover each other instinctively. Meals, marches, and drills were opportunities to forge cohesion. Every man understood that the survival of his brother meant the survival of a line, the phalanx, and ultimately the army itself. Those who broke ranks, those who hesitated, learned quickly that their failure threatened everyone around them. In this environment, courage was not an abstract ideal. It was a daily, tangible practice. The decades after Plataea transformed Greece in ways that no one at the time could have predicted. The immediate threat of Persian invasion fades, but the memory of the battles and the unity that saved the land continue to shape every decision. Athens, having rebuilt itself from ashes, emerges as a cultural and intellectual powerhouse. Philosophers debate, dramatists write plays that question morality and fate, and sculptors carve statues that honor both gods and men. Every public building, every temple, is a testament to resilience and the unbreakable spirit of the people. Sparta, meanwhile, maintains its disciplined military culture. While other city-states expand their influence through trade, politics, and culture, Sparta holds firm to the ideals of training, loyalty, and martial excellence. Yet even they cannot ignore the lessons of Plataea. No city can survive alone. Alliances, once forged in desperation, become the framework for diplomacy and regional politics. Leaders across the Peloponnese study maps, recall strategies, and plan for conflicts both internal and external, determined that Greece will never again be so vulnerable. Trade routes reopen, connecting distant cities, and ideas spread alongside goods. Colonies that had been abandoned return to prosperity. The Greek world, while still composed of independent city-states with competing interests, begins to see the value of cooperation. Festivals, athletic competitions, and shared religious ceremonies reinforce cultural bonds, reminding citizens of a collective identity beyond the walls of their own polis. At the same time, military innovation continues. The phalanx remains central, but commanders experiment with new formations, tactics, and training methods, drawing on the experiences of Plataea and other battles. Naval power grows in importance, particularly for Athens, whose fleet had proven decisive in preventing further Persian incursions. The lessons of Plataea become embedded in doctrine, taught to every young soldier, not merely as history, but as instruction for survival, leadership, and the price of unity. Stories of heroism, courage, and sacrifice become a living part of Greek culture. Songs echo in the streets, poems are recited in schools, and dramas are performed in open-air theaters. Heroes like those who stood at Plataea are remembered not only for their skill in war, but for their ability to inspire, to embody the ideals that allow an entire civilization to endure. Children grow up hearing tales of courage, loyalty, and strategic brilliance, carrying these lessons into every aspect of public and private life. Yet for all the growth and triumph, Greece remains cautious. Memories of burned cities, of rivers filled with the dead, and of the relentless power of empires beyond the horizon linger in every council chamber and city wall. Politicians, generals, and citizens alike know that freedom is never permanent without vigilance. Plataea becomes more than a battlefield. It is a warning, a guide, and a standard against which future generations measure themselves. Over time, the classical age emerges. Democracy flourishes in Athens, tempered by experience and the memory of survival. Sparta continues to mold warriors who are as disciplined as they are feared. The culture of the Greek world, forged under the pressures of invasion and war, blossoms into philosophy, art, and science that will influence civilizations for centuries. Plataea's blood-soaked plains may have been silent for years, but the lessons learned there echo in every debate, every decision, every work of art, and every shield raised in defense of freedom. The Greek city-states, once fractured and threatened, now stand as a testament to resilience. They carry forward the memory of Plataea not as a tale of death alone, but as proof that even the smallest states, when united, can withstand the greatest threats. And so the story of Plataea lives on, not in the clash of swords or the thundering of hooves, but in the enduring spirit of a people who refused to be conquered, who rebuilt, who remembered, and who grew stronger because of it. This era, born from fire and blood, sets the stage for an age of achievement and conflict that will define the Greek world for generations, proving that the legacy of a single battle can ripple through centuries, shaping politics, culture, and the very identity of a civilization. Plataea becomes more than a memory. It becomes a symbol. Across the Greek world, leaders invoke its story when debating alliances, when calling men to arms, and when teaching young citizens the value of courage and sacrifice. Every city-state, from Corinth to Thebes, remembers that the unity forged under fire can turn the tide of even the largest invasions. Statues and monuments rise to honor the dead, but the true monument is cultural, an enduring belief that no empire, no matter its size or strength, can crush the spirit of a people determined to defend their freedom as decades pass. Historians and storytellers revisit Plataea again and again. Poets recount the bravery of soldiers who faced overwhelming odds. Philosophers dissect the strategy and discipline that allowed a coalition of city-states to endure, and generals study the battlefield, extracting lessons to apply in future wars. The young grow up hearing the same words repeated in schools and temples. Courage, unity, vigilance. These are not abstract ideas. They're the foundation of survival, the code by which every citizen is measured. Meanwhile, the shadow of Persia never fully disappears. Even after the empire retreats east, its influence lingers in the politics of trade, diplomacy, and the fear it inspired. Greek city-states build stronger fortifications, train their armies relentlessly, and establish networks of spies and scouts. Naval power, once secondary, becomes central to security, and Athens leads the way, transforming its fleet into an instrument of both defense and influence. The lessons of Plataea inform every maneuver, every alliance, and every campaign that follows. Cultural development flourishes alongside military vigilance. Art, architecture, drama, and philosophy all carry subtle echoes of the Persian Wars. Plays dramatize the tension between honor and survival. History books immortalize tactical brilliance, and public spaces celebrate civic courage. Even as the Greeks argue, trade, and sometimes fight amongst themselves, the shared memory of Plataea remains a unifying force, a story of survival that reminds them all what they are capable of when they act together. Over time, the ideas born from that battlefield influence foreign policy, education, and civic life. Generals train not only in combat, but in logistics, diplomacy, and strategy. Politicians invoke the past to guide decisions about war, trade, and treaties. Young citizens learn both the glory and the cost of freedom. Plataea becomes a lens through which every new threat is measured and every achievement is celebrated. The battlefield itself, once covered in blood and bodies, fades from memory as a physical space, but its lessons remain etched into the Greek identity. The story of Plataea also becomes a cautionary tale. Every city-state remembers the chaos of disunity, the danger of delayed decisions, and the fragility of supply lines. Wars are waged with both courage and calculation, ensuring that future generations do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Leaders who rise in the years that follow are measured against the heroes of Plataea, and the decisions they make are guided by the shadow of that decisive moment when Greece stood together against the might of an empire. In essence, Plataea transcends the battlefield. It becomes a cultural and political touchstone, shaping the trajectory of the Greek world. The memory of those who fought and died fosters resilience, discipline, and unity. The legacy of the battle echoes not only in military strategies, but in the hearts and minds of every citizen who inherits a Greece forged in fire and blood. The courage, the suffering, the decisions made there ripple through generations, creating a civilization capable of both astonishing beauty as the sun sets over the plains. The surviving soldiers look out at the remnants of the Persian army retreating toward the mountains, knowing they have achieved something extraordinary. The horror, the chaos, and the suffering of Plataea will never be forgotten. But neither will the proof that the Greek city-states, when united by necessity and led by capable commanders, can defy the impossible and preserve their freedom. Greece has endured, and for the first time since the invasion began, hope outweighs fear. The weeks after Plataea are filled with hard work, rebuilding, and the quiet pride of survival. In Athens, refugees return from the islands to salvage what they can, clearing rubble, repairing broken walls, and re-establishing homes. Temples are restored, fields replanted, and a sense of normalcy slowly returns, though the scars of fire and invasion linger. Spartan and allied soldiers move among the city-states, offering aid, enforcing order, and ensuring that law and governance resume in places that had seen only chaos for months. Across the Peloponnese, Sparta consolidates its influence. Leaders from Corinth, Tegea, and other allies meet in the city to formalize agreements, to discuss military reforms, and to honor the men who had marched north to Plataea. Stories of the battlefield, of Mecistius's fall, and the relentless courage of Greek soldiers travel fast, carried by messengers, merchants, and returning soldiers. The myth of Thermopylae merges seamlessly with the reality of Plataea, forming a single narrative that inspires pride and vigilance. Pausanias ensures that the Greek forces remain ready, not for immediate battle, but as a deterrent. New fortifications are built along key passes and strategic points, training resumes, emphasizing coordination between city-states that once saw themselves as rivals. The victory at Plataea becomes both a shield and a warning. Greece has survived, but the Persian Empire is vast and relentless. Diplomacy, alliances, and readiness become just as vital as courage in the phalanx. Even in the heart of the Persian Empire, news of Plataea reverberates. Xerxes receives word of the defeat and the death of Mardonius. Persian generals debate how to respond, but the cost of another large campaign in Greece looms heavy. The empire shifts its focus elsewhere, leaving the Greek city-states breathing the first air of freedom they have known in years. For ordinary Greeks, the impact is personal. Families rebuild lives that were shattered by fire and displacement. Soldiers return to their homes with stories of valor, horror, and survival. The bond between city-states, forged under fire and maintained through necessity, grows stronger. Lessons from Plataea of unity, discipline, and the power of collective effort are passed on to the next generation. Children hear of the heroics of their fathers, of the day when Sparta and Athens, once distant rivals, stood together to save their homeland. Yet, even in victory, the shadow of loss remains. Thousands have died. Entire villages were consumed in the Persian advance. Survivors carry the memory of fire, blood, and death into rebuilding efforts, reminding everyone that freedom is won at a terrible cost. The Greek city-states, tempered by hardship and triumph, emerge stronger, their alliance no longer temporary or fragile, but rooted in experience and shared sacrifice. The story of Plataea spreads beyond the battlefield. Poets and storytellers recount it with vivid detail, while philosophers and leaders reflect on its lessons. It becomes a symbol not only of courage and strategy, but of the enduring spirit of a people who refused to surrender, who reclaimed their homeland, and who ensured that Greece would remain free to chart its own destiny. I end the quiet moments. As the fields turn green again and cities rise from ashes, the soldiers and citizens alike understand something profound. The Persian threat has been halted, but vigilance must remain eternal. Plataea was not the end of war, but it was the beginning of a new era, a Greece united, wary, and wiser for the suffering it endured. The plains of Boeotia, once soaked with blood and fire, now breathe again under the wind, carrying the memory of both death and victory across the hills and valleys of a free land. The years that follow Plataea are a strange mixture of relief and reflection. Across Greece, cities once threatened by Persian fire slowly regain their shape and rhythm. Athens rebuilds its temples and civic buildings, not merely as functional spaces, but as monuments to survival and resilience. Marble rises again from the ruins, craftsmen returning to their trade, carving statues and friezes that honor the dead and celebrate the living. The memory of Plataea and the sacrifices made by Spartan and allied soldiers is ever present. Bronze shields are polished not only for parade, but as symbols of vigilance, reminders of what it cost to protect the homeland. Sparta, though proud of its victory, remains a city bound by discipline and duty. Pausanias and the elders work tirelessly to ensure that the alliances forged under fire do not fade in peacetime. Treaties are ratified, trade routes reopened, and the Peloponnesian states begin to see themselves not merely as individual cities, but as part of a larger collective. The scars of war are visible everywhere, yet they are paired with cautious hope, the realization that unity, combined with courage, can withstand even the might of empires. Across the Aegean, tales of Plataea ripple outward. Poets sing of Mecistius's fall, of Greek phalanxes holding against cavalry that once seemed unstoppable, of Athenians and Spartans standing shoulder to shoulder. Schools teach the story not only as history, but as moral instruction, instilling lessons of loyalty, strategy, and sacrifice. Children who had been evacuated during the invasion returned to find streets and temples renewed, carrying with them the echoes of voices that cried out for freedom across the burning plains. Despite the victory, the shadow of loss never fully disappears. Graves stretch along the hillsides of Plataea and Boeotia, markers of the countless who fell. Families continue to mourn those who will never return. Pausanias and other leaders walk among the tombs, quietly counting the cost of what they survived. The victory is celebrated, but it is also understood. Freedom is fragile, and the price of security is eternal vigilance. Trade resumes, festivals return, and debates fill the agora. Philosophers and statesmen, freed from immediate threat, begin to shape the intellectual and cultural foundations of Greece for generations to come. Art, architecture, and literature flourish in cities no longer under immediate threat, a testament to the resilience of a civilization that refused to bend. Military reforms continue, ensuring that the lessons of Plataea, coordination, preparation, and the necessity of trust between allies are embedded in every soldier trained for the future. In Sparta, Athens, and every city that had felt the Persian advance, the people carry a shared understanding. The victory was not due to any single hero or city, but to a coalition willing to put aside pride and rivalry. That understanding becomes the bedrock for a Greece that, while still made of many independent city-states, can now envision unity when danger arises. The plains of Plataea, once soaked with blood and fear, are remembered not just as a battlefield, but as a place where survival, courage, and collaboration carved a path for a new era. Even generations later, the names of the fallen, the stories of valor, and the strategies that turned the tide remain alive in song and memory. Greece rebuilds not as a fractured land, but as a civilization tempered by war and strengthened by the knowledge that its people, when united, can withstand even the mightiest of empires. The echoes of Plataea, carried by wind across the hills and plains, become the heartbeat of a free and enduring Greece. Officers shout conflicting orders. Some units keep fighting while others begin pulling back. The tight pressure holding the Spartans in place weakens. The Spartans feel it immediately. They push harder. Bronze shields slam forward. Spears thrust deeper into the Persian ranks. The formation advances step by relentless step. The Persian center begins to collapse. What had been a brutal stalemate only moments earlier suddenly turns into something far more dangerous for the Persian army. Men start running at first only a few, then hundreds, then thousands. Persian soldiers turn away from the Spartan line and flee across the battlefield toward the safety of their fortified camp behind them. Once that movement begins, it spreads like panic through the entire army, and the Spartans, who have finally broken the enemy line, surge forward after them. The battle is no longer a contest between two armies that has become a chase, and across the plains of Plataea, the Persian army begins to fall apart. Once the Persian line breaks, the chaos becomes total. Thousands of soldiers scatter in every direction, abandoning shields, weapons, and comrades. Horses bolt, trampling foot soldiers who cannot escape fast enough. Dust rises in thick, choking clouds, mixing with the cries of men and the screams of animals. Arrows still fly, but now they are aimless, striking friend and foe alike as the retreat becomes a desperate rout. The Greeks do not stop. The Spartan phalanx pushes forward relentlessly, maintaining discipline even in the pursuit. They cut down those who falter, spear after spear, driving the fleeing Persians into the mud and dust. Corinthian, Tegean, Athenian, soldiers from every city-state press forward without pause. Their training, their anger, and their desire for revenge for burned homes and slaughtered families fuel the relentless advance. Mardonius's death has left the Persian army leaderless. Officers attempt to gather units, but the momentum of panic is unstoppable. Cavalry tries to regroup, but without coordination, charges collapse against the disciplined Greek infantry that moves like a wave over the plains. Each attempt to form a line is met with the steady, unyielding advance of the Spartans and their allies. By midday, the open plains of Plataea are strewn with bodies. Horses lie broken among the dead. Armor glints in the sun for men who cannot rise again. The dust and smoke of battle rise like a permanent cloud over the field, obscuring the horizon. Every soldier who survives carries the memory of what happened there. Every step across that land leaves footprints in blood and sweat. Some Persians find small pockets of defense near the camp, try to form a barricade with wagons and tents, but the Greek assault sweeps through them. Spears pierce the lines. Swords hack down men attempting to regroup. By the time the last defenders fall, the Persian camp is overrun. Supplies are seized, tents burned, banners torn down. The scattered remnants of the once mighty army fleeing toward the mountains in disarray. In the aftermath, silence begins to fall over the battlefield. The sounds of clashing metal, the screams, and the pounding of hooves gradually give way to groans and cries. Thousands of Persians lie dead or wounded, and the Greek soldiers, exhausted and bloodied, stand amidst the carnage. Pausanias surveys the field. His armor is scratched and dented, sweat and blood streaking his face. He knows this victory is decisive. The Persian army that threatened all of Greece has been shattered, its command destroyed, its morale broken. Word spreads quickly among the Greek forces. Plataea is won. City-states that had once doubted Sparta's resolve now understand the cost of hesitation. Athens, Tegea, Corinth, all those who marched to the field together, now celebrate quietly amidst the grim reality of the battlefield. There is no singing, no trumpets, only the realization that the threat that once seemed unstoppable has been undone through courage, discipline, and a single, crucial moment in the chaos of combat. The plains of Plataea, once a land of anticipation and fear, are now a testament to what coordinated unity and determination can achieve. The Persian campaign in Greece has been stopped. The armies of the Greek city-states, scarred and exhausted, have survived, and in surviving, they have proven something far greater than victory. They have proven that no empire, no matter how vast, is invincible when the courage of men stands against it. Pausanias allows himself a moment to breathe. His army is battered, weary, and hungry, but it is alive. For the first time in months, the terror that began at Thermopylae seems distant. Sparta has marched, Athens has fought, the Peloponnesian allies have held. Greece has endured. The war is not over, but the most dangerous threat has been broken, and the story of Plataea will be remembered as the moment the tide finally turned against the invaders, proving that even the mightiest empire can be undone by the steadfast courage of those determined to defend their homeland. As the dust settles over Plataea, the Greek soldiers begin moving cautiously through the battlefield. The dead lie in tangled heaps, shields crushed beneath bodies, horses still clinging to life while men tend to the wounded, cutting free those trapped under the wreckage of fallen cavalry and collapsed tents. Spartan medics and helots move swiftly, bringing water and rudimentary bandages, while Athenians and allies help gather the surviving Persian prisoners. The air is heavy with the scent of blood, smoke, and scorched earth, a reminder that the cost of victory is always measured in human lives. Pausanias rides slowly along the lines, inspecting his army. The Spartans, though exhausted, remain disciplined. Their shields still carry scratches and dents from the battle, their armor battered but unbroken. Athenians share news of captured officers and scattered regiments. Across the plains, the remnants of the Persian army retreat in disarray toward the mountains, their formation broken, their morale destroyed. Mardonius lies dead among the fallen. The man who had seemed unstoppable, now just another corpse in a field of many. Word of the victory spreads quickly. Messengers ride to the nearby cities, telling tales of Plataea's slaughter and the decisive courage of the Greek coalition. In Athens, still recovering from its earlier devastation, refugees and soldiers alike rejoice. The city may have burned, but the Persian threat has been ended, and the hope of rebuilding begins to stir. Corinth, Tegea, and other allied city-states send envoys to Sparta, praising the unity and courage that saved Greece from conquest. The alliances that had seemed fragile under pressure are strengthened by the shared triumph. Even as the Greeks celebrate in quiet, practical ways, the leaders understand that the war's conclusion is more than just survival. Plataea ensures Persia will withdraw from central Greece, leaving the city-states free to rebuild their homes, farms, and temples. The psychological blow to the Persians is immense. The news of Mardonius's death and the annihilation of his army will ripple back to Xerxes himself, proving that even the most formidable forces can be undone by disciplined strategy, courage, and unity among those defending their homeland. The battlefield is cleared as best as possible. Greek soldiers bury the dead where they fell, marking graves for their comrades, and even some of the Persian officers, a gesture of respect and practicality. Water sources near Plataea are secure to prevent any further shortages, and patrols are set to intercept any remnants of the retreating army. Supplies are gathered from the abandoned Persian camp, feeding the hungry soldiers who have endured days of sun, dust, and thirst. Pausanias addresses his officers, reminding them that while Plataea is a decisive victory, the work is not yet finished. Greece must remain vigilant, but for now, the immediate danger is removed. The coalition will march home in orderly fashion, returning to their city-states to rebuild what was lost and prepare for the future. The heroics of Thermopylae and the slaughter of Plataea together form a narrative that will be told for generations. Courage, unity, and discipline can withstand even the mightiest empire. Thousands of impacts at once. Arrows hammer against bronze shields. Shafts rattle across helmets. Some slip through gaps, punching into exposed legs or arms. Men grunt in pain, but the line holds. The Spartans do not move. They crouch behind their shields, letting the storm break over them. Another volley follows, and another. The arrows fall so thickly that some later Greek accounts claim they briefly blocked out the sun itself. Still, the Spartans do not charge. They stand perfectly still. This frustrates the Persians. Normally, their arrow fire breaks enemy formations quickly. Light infantry panic. Soldiers abandon their positions. Lines crumble under the relentless rain of missiles. But these men are not ordinary soldiers. They are Spartans. They have trained their entire lives to endure exactly this kind of punishment. Waiting for the gods, what happens next is something that confuses even the Persians watching from the other side. The Spartans still refuse to advance, even as arrows keep striking the line. even as men begin falling. The reason lies in something deeper than tactics, religion. Before major battles, Spartan commanders perform sacrifices to the gods. Only when the omens appear favorable do they give the order to attack. And right now, the omens are not good. Pausanias kneels near the Spartan line beside a sacrificial animal. Priests cut the animal open and examine the organs. The signs are wrong as Pausanias waits. Around him, soldiers continue dying under the arrow storm that a Spartan officer reportedly shouts in frustration that the men are being slaughtered while their commander stares at entrails. But Pausanias does not move if the gods do not approve the attack. The Spartans will not charge. This moment becomes one of the most tense pauses in the entire war. Because the Persians think they are slowly destroying the Greek-centered, in reality, the Spartans are simply waiting for the signal that will unleash them. Mardonius moves closer across the field. Mardonius grows impatient. The arrows are doing damage, but not fast enough. The Spartan line still stands. He makes a decision that will change everything. Instead of relying only on archers, he pushes his infantry forward. Persian soldiers advance, carrying large wicker shields and short spears. Behind them come more archers, firing continuously as they move. The distance between the armies shrinks. Arrows now strike the Spartan from closer range. More men fall, but the phalanx still does not move. The tension becomes unbearable. Dust swirls around the battlefield. Persian troops shout and beat their shields. Horses scream somewhere in the chaos. And then, finally, the sacrifice changes. The omens are good. Pausanias rises to his feet. He turns toward the Spartan line. The order spreads instantly. Advance. The bronze wall begins to move, slowly at first, then faster. Thousands of shields pushing forward in perfect formation. Thousands of spears lowering into attack position. Across the plain, Persian soldiers suddenly realize something terrifying. The Spartans are coming, and this time, they are not stopping. The Spartan line begins to move. First, the advance is slow, deliberate, almost calm. Bronze shields rise and lock together, overlapping until the front of the formation becomes a single wall of metal. Long spears lower in unison, their iron tips pointing forward like the edge of a moving forest. Sandaled feet strike the ground in rhythm. Thousands of men stepping forward across the dusty plain toward the Persian army waiting ahead. Arrows are still falling. They rattle against the shields and helmets, hammering down in waves. Some punch through gaps in the armor and drive into flesh. Men grunt, stumble, collapse into the dust, but the formation absorbs the losses without stopping. Every time a Spartan falls, the man behind him simply steps forward and closes the gap. The line never breaks. Across the field, Persian soldiers watch the bronze wall getting closer and closer. They fire faster now. Archers draw and release as quickly as their arms will allow, sending arrows arcing through the air in dark clouds. Officers shout orders, trying to keep the ranks steady as the Spartans advance. Then the distance disappears. The impact is violent. Spartan shields slam into Persian wicker shields with a cracking sound that echoes across the battlefield. The first row of spears drives forward instantly, stabbing into the Persian line. Iron tips punch through wicker shields, through cloth armor, through flesh. Men scream as they are thrown backward or pinned to the ground. The Persians fight back with everything they have. They surge forward in huge numbers, trying to overwhelm the tighter Spartan formation. Arrows continue flying from behind their own ranks. Javelins flash through the air. Some Persian soldiers grab the shafts of Spartan spears and try to wrench them away, while others rush in close with short swords, stabbing toward exposed legs beneath the shields. The fighting becomes a crushing mass of bodies. Men shove shoulder to shoulder. Shields grind together. Spears snap under the pressure and are replaced with swords and daggers. The ground turns slick with blood and churned dirt as soldiers slip and struggle to stay on their feet. For a moment, the Persians even manage to push into parts of the Spartan line. A few shields are torn away. A few Spartans are dragged down and cut apart in the chaos. But the phalanx responds the way it always does, IT Titans. Every Spartan knows the man beside him. Every movement has been drilled into them since childhood. They shift their shields, step forward together, and rebuild the wall. The pressure of their formation begins slowly forcing the Persians backward. Watching this from the rear, Mardonius realizes something is going wrong. The Spartans are not breaking. The arrow storm did not stop them. The swarm of infantry is not stopping them either. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the bronze line is pushing forward as Mardonius makes a decision that many commanders would avoid. He rides into the battle himself. Mounted on a white horse and surrounded by an elite guard of Persian nobles, he pushes toward the thickest part of the fighting, shouting orders and urging his soldiers forward. The sight electrifies the Persian ranks. Their commander is among them now, fighting in the same dust and blood. The Persians surge forward again with renewed fury. The pressure against the Spartan line increases instantly. Persian guards slam into the formation with axes and swords. Arrows fall at closer range now, striking shields with sharp metallic cracks. The battlefield dissolves into a violent storm of noise. Men shouting, metal clashing, horses screaming somewhere in the chaos. Dust rising so thick it stings the eyes and fills the throat. In the middle of it all, Mardonius rides dangerously close to the Spartan formation, directing the attack and trying to rally his soldiers for one final push that might shatter the Greek center. For a moment, it almost works. The Persians press forward hard enough to slow the Spartan advance. The two lines grind against each other in a deadlock of pushing shields and stabbing blades. Then, inside the chaos, something small happens. Something almost accidental that a Spartan soldier named Eumnestus spots the Persian commander through the dust. Mardonius stands out clearly in the confusion, his armor gleaming, his white horse towering above the mass of fighting men. Eumnestus does not have a spear ready as, he grabs the first weapon he can find at a heavy stone lying in the dirt at his feet. He hurls it with all his strength. The stone flies through the chaos of the battlefield and strikes Mardonius squarely in the head. The Persian general collapses instantly from his horse. For a few seconds, almost no one understands what has happened then. The word begins spreading through the Persian ranks. Mardonius is down. The commander of the entire army lies motionless in the dust. His elite guards rush forward to recover the body, but the Spartan line surges at the same moment, driving their spears into the suddenly confused Persian soldiers in front of them. Without their commander, the Persian attack falters. It will be scattered across the battlefield, and that chaos will trigger the most brutal fighting of the entire war. The order moves quietly through the Spartan ranks. Pack your gear, prepare to move, wait for the signal. Most of the soldiers obey without question. The plan makes sense. The army is dying where it stands. If they stay any longer, thirst will defeat them before Persia ever needs to lift a sword. But among the Spartan formations, one man hears the order and feels something twist violently inside his chest. His name is Amphiaratus, that he is not an ordinary soldier. He commands a lock-hose, a unit within the Spartan line, a respected officer, a veteran of many campaigns. And to him, the word retreat is worse than death. When the order reaches his unit, he stares at the messenger in disbelief. Withdraw, leave the position, in the dark, without even facing the enemy. To Amphiaratus, the command feels like betrayal. Betrayal of Spartan law, Spartan pride, Spartan identity. Spartans do not retreat. Spartans hold the line that he refuses that first the officers around him assume he has misunderstood. They explain again, this is not cowardice. This is strategy. The army will regroup closer to Plataea. The battle will still come. But Amphiaratus only grows more furious. His voice rises in the darkness. If Sparta wishes to run, it may do so. But I will not. The word spread quickly through the nearby units. Spartan officers begin gathering around him, trying to calm him before the argument becomes loud enough for Persian scouts to hear. Pausanias himself is eventually forced to intervene. The regent arrives at the Spartan position under cover of darkness, hoping to settle the matter quickly before the entire army begins moving. He explains the situation with brutal clarity. The army is starving. The water source is lost. Remaining here means certain destruction, but Amampharidas does not bend to him. The plan is simple cowardice disguised as clever tactics. Sparta is abandoning the battlefield, and he will not be part of it. The argument becomes so intense that the other Spartans begin glancing nervously toward the Persian lines across the plain. If the shouting carries too far in the night air, the entire withdrawal could collapse before it even begins. Then, in a gesture that will be remembered for centuries, Amampharidas picks up a massive stone from the ground. He walks toward Pausanias and drops it at the regent's feet. "This," he says, "is my vote." In Sparta, votes in certain councils were sometimes cast by dropping stones. Amampharidas has just cast his vote against retreat. The moment hangs in silence. Pausanias realizes something horrifying, that he cannot force the man to move, not without risking an open confrontation inside the Spartan ranks, something that would destroy discipline at the worst possible moment. The army moves, but not together. The night deepens. Units across the Greek line begin withdrawing exactly as planned. The Corinthians slip away first, then the Megarians. Other contingents follow, moving quietly toward the safer ground near Plataea. But confusion spreads almost immediately. In the darkness, paths are missed. Orders are misunderstood. Some units stop and wait for others who never arrive. Others move too far, too fast. What was meant to be a careful, coordinated relocation slowly turns into something much more dangerous: disorder. Meanwhile, the Spartans remain behind longer than planned. Pausanias stays with Amampharidas, hoping to convince him even at the last moment. Time passes. The rest of the Greek army continues moving farther away. Eventually something changes. Perhaps Amampharidas finally understands the danger of being left alone. Perhaps pressure from the other Spartans forces him to reconsider. Whatever the reason, he finally gives the order. His unit begins moving, but by then it is far too late. Dawn is approaching, and across the river, Persian scouts are already returning to their commander with urgent news. The Greek lines are breaking apart in the Persian camp. The report reaches Mardonius just as the first light of morning begins touching the hills. At first he thinks it must be a mistake. The Greeks abandoning their positions, but as more riders arrive with the same story, the truth becomes undeniable. The enemy line is gone. What Mardonius sees is not a tactical withdrawal. He sees panic, that he sees a fleeing army, and to a general commanding thousands of cavalry. There is only one logical response to a fleeing enemy: attack. Orders explode through the Persian camp. Trumpets blare. Horsemen scramble into their saddles. Infantry units grab their shields and begin moving toward the river. The Persian army surges forward in a roaring wave. Across the plain, Greek soldiers who believed they had escaped under cover of darkness now hear something terrifying behind them. Hooves, thousands of them. The Persians are coming, and the Greek army is no longer one army. The Corinthians are miles away. The Athenians are marching on a different road. The Spartans, delayed by Amampharidas' stubbornness, are still dangerously close to the Persian lines. The battlefield that had been quiet for days suddenly explodes into motion. Dust clouds rise across the plain as Persian cavalry pours across the Esopus River. But something becomes clear almost immediately. The Greeks are not running at least, not the Spartans. When Pausanias realizes the Persians are advancing in full force, he does something unexpected. Instead of continuing the retreat, he halts his troops, the Spartans. Turn, bronze shields lock together, spears lower. Behind them, the Tegeans fall into formation. Amampharidas and his men take their place in the line they almost abandoned. Across the field, the Persian army surges closer. Archers move forward. Cavalry begins circling. The center of the Persian force rides Mardonius himself, armored and confident, convinced he is about to crush a disorganized enemy. But what he sees instead is something far more dangerous: a Spartan phalanx forming under the rising sun. Thousands of shields overlapping, spears pointing forward like a forest of iron. The ground between the armies grows quiet for a moment, because now the battle everyone feared and everyone wanted is about to begin. Not a desperate last stand like Thermopylae, not a naval clash like Salamis, but the largest infantry battle the Greek world has ever seen. And before the sun sets over the plains of Plataea, one of these armies will be completely destroyed. The morning sun rises slowly over the plains of Plataea, turning the dust in the air gold. Both armies can finally see each other clearly. What had once been a careful standoff across the river is now something completely different. The battlefield is no longer neatly divided. The Greek army is scattered from the chaotic night withdrawal, while the Persian forces surge forward in a massive wave. Yet in the center of it all, something unexpectedly solid stands waiting. The Spartans. Under the command of Pausanias, the Spartan line forms with practiced precision. Bronze shields overlap. Spears level forward. The crimson cloaks ripple behind them like a field of dark red grass. Beside them stand the Tegeans, another hard-fighting force from the Peloponnese. Together they form a wall of iron and discipline. Across the plain rides the man who believes he is about to destroy them. Mardonius pushes his horse forward at the head of his army. His confidence is understandable. What he sees in front of him looks like only part of the Greek force. The rest appears scattered across the countryside to him. It looks like victory already in progress. But Mardonius knows one thing well about Spartan warfare. You never charge their shield wall without weakening it first as the Persians begin the battle the way they always do. With arrows, the storm begins. Persian archers step forward in thick ranks. Thousands of them. They kneel, draw their bows, and aim toward the tightly packed Spartan formation standing across the plain. For a moment, the battlefield becomes almost silent. Then the command is given. The sky darkens and a massive cloud of arrows rises into the air and arcs toward the Greek line like a black wave. When it lands, the sound is horrifying. And soon, Mardonius will begin using the one strategy that can slowly strangle the Greek army without risking another major engagement. He will cut them off from food, and worse, from water. And when thirst begins to devour the Greek camp, the real crisis at Plataea will begin. First, the Greek soldiers celebrate. The death of Mecistius spreads through the ranks like fire in dry grass. Men who had spent days standing under the burning sun, staring across the river at an enemy that seemed endless, now feel something they had almost forgotten. Confidence. They had killed the giant. The Persian commander who looked untouchable had died in the dirt like any other man. His armor had not saved him. His strength had not saved him. His status had not saved him. For a moment, the entire Greek army breathes easier. But Pausanias does not celebrate. He knows the death of one cavalry commander changes nothing about the battlefield itself. The Aesopus River still lies between the armies. The open plains still belong to Persian cavalry. And most dangerously of all, the Greek army has begun running out of time. The supplies they carried north are almost gone. Bread rations shrink day by day. Meat disappears entirely. What little grain remains must be divided between tens of thousands of men who have been standing in armor under a merciless sun. Hunger is uncomfortable, but thirst is something else entirely. Behind the Greek position lies the Gargaphia spring, a narrow but steady flow of clean water that has been keeping the entire army alive. Every day, long lines of soldiers and attendants carry clay jars and leather skins down to the spring, filling them with the water that keeps the army functioning. Without it, the army cannot survive. Mardonius knows exactly where that spring is. His scouts have told him everything, and now he begins turning that knowledge into a weapon. Persian cavalry rides out again, but this time they do not attack the Greek line. They ride behind it. Across the countryside, they spread like hunting wolves. Supply wagons moving toward the Greek camp are ambushed and destroyed. Drivers are cut down where they stand. Oxen are slaughtered or driven off. Barns and storehouses that somehow survived the earlier Persian advance are burned to the ground. Fields are trampled. Livestock vanishes. Within days, the land surrounding the Greek army becomes a scorched wasteland. No food, no forage. Nothing left to gather. Inside the Greek camp, the effects are immediate. Bread rations shrink again. Soldiers who had already been hungry now begin going to sleep with empty stomachs. Tempers flare. Arguments break out between contingents from different cities. The fragile alliance holding the army together begins to strain under the pressure. But even hunger is not the worst of it. The cavalry soon turns its attention toward the real target. The Gargaphia spring point. One morning, the first water carriers approach the spring as usual, clay jars balanced carefully in their arms. They do not make it back. Persian horsemen burst from behind the nearby hills, arrows already flying. Several water carriers collapse before they even understand what is happening. Others drop their jars and run. The jars shatter against the rocks. Precious water spills into the dust. Over the next hours, the harassment continues. Anyone approaching the spring becomes a target. Arrows whistle through the air. Riders charge close enough to scatter the water parties before disappearing again into the countryside. The ground around the spring churns into mud and filth beneath the pounding hooves. Some reports claim the Persians drag animal carcasses into the water itself. Whether that detail is perfectly true or not hardly matters. The result is the same. The Greek army begins to fear the very water source keeping it alive. Inside the camp, the mood darkens. Soldiers argue over who must make the next run to the spring. Volunteers grow scarce. Men who return with water are treated almost like heroes, but many never return at all. Days pass. The sun beats down relentlessly. Bronze helmets become ovens. Lips crack. Tongues swell. Some soldiers begin dreaming about water while they sleep. Clear rivers, cold mountain streams, rain falling on their faces. They wake to dry mouths and empty jars. The army is slowly being strangled. Pausanias sees it happening in real time. His men are starving. His men are dehydrated. And every day they remain on this hillside makes the situation worse. Yet attacking across the river remains suicide that if he orders a charge. Persian cavalry will destroy them before they even reach the far bank. He is trapped between two disasters. Wait and watch the army collapse from thirst or attack, and watch it be slaughtered in the open. Across the river, Mardonius watches carefully. Everything is unfolding exactly the way he hoped. He does not need to defeat the Greeks in a glorious battle. He only needs them to move. Eventually, hunger and thirst will force Pausanias to do something desperate, and the moment the Greek army begins moving across the plain, Persian cavalry will strike. Mardonius is patient that he knows the trap is tightening in the Greek camp. The commanders gather in tense meetings as the situation becomes unbearable. Athenians, Spartans, Corinthians, all of them arguing under flickering torchlight inside cramped command tents. Every discussion circles back to the same brutal conclusion. They cannot stay here, that if they remain on this hillside much longer, the army will simply wither away. Men will begin collapsing from thirst. The coalition will disintegrate. And the Persians will win without ever needing to attack. There is only one possible solution. They must withdraw, not retreat from the war, but reposition closer to the town of Plataea itself, where wells still hold clean water and where supply routes can be restored. But retreating during the day is impossible. The Persian cavalry would ride them down across the open ground as the commanders design a dangerous plan. They will move at night, under cover of darkness. The entire Greek army will withdraw from its current position and relocate closer to Plataea. Units will leave their positions one at a time, slipping away quietly while small rearguard forces maintain the illusion that the line is still intact. If everything goes perfectly, the Persians will not realize the Greeks have moved until morning, and by then the army will be safely established on stronger ground. But the plan depends on something incredibly fragile: coordination. Every contingent must move at exactly the right time. Every unit must follow the correct path through the darkness. If even a few groups lose their way, the army could scatter across the plain. And if the Persians discover the movement before it is complete, cavalry will descend on the withdrawing troops like wolves on wounded prey. The decision is made anyway. The army cannot survive another day where it stands. Orders spread quietly through the camp. Prepare for movement. And torches unless absolutely necessary. And loud voices. Tie down loose equipment so it does not clatter in the dark. Soldiers begin packing their gear with nervous hands. Some feel relief that the waiting is finally over. Others feel a growing knot of dread in their stomachs. Moving a massive army at night is dangerous under the best circumstances. Doing it within striking distance of the most powerful cavalry force in the ancient world is something closer to madness. As the sun sinks below the hills, shadows swallow the Greek camp. Campfires dim. Conversations fall to whispers. Across the river, Persian scouts watch the flickering lights. Carefully try to detect any change in the Greek positions. They have been waiting for this moment, because somewhere in the Persian camp, Mardonius is almost certain of one thing. The Greeks will not be able to endure much longer. And when they finally move, that is when he will strike. The night grows deeper. The Greek army prepares to slip away into the darkness. But before the first units even begin moving, something unexpected is already about to happen, that a Spartan officer will refuse the order to retreat, and his stubborn defiance will shatter the entire plan by the time the sun rises over Plataea. The Greek army will no longer be a single formation. Some soldiers whisper that Pausanias is afraid. Others argue that he's the only thing keeping them alive. But Mardonius understands something the Greeks are slowly beginning to realize. Time is on his side. The Persian army has better supply lines, more resources, more mobility. Instead of attacking the Greek line directly, he begins using the one weapon that can slowly destroy them without risking a full battle, his cavalry. And soon, the plains of Plataea will thunder under the hooves of thousands of Persian horsemen, searching for the first crack in the Greek army. The first thunder of hooves comes just after sunrise. First it is distant, a low vibration rolling across the plain like faraway thunder. Greek soldiers standing along the hillside feel it through the ground before they fully understand what it is. Then the dust begins to rise. Across the river, movement ripples through the Persian lines. Cavalry detachments ride forward in disciplined columns, their horses kicking up long plumes of pale earth as they approach the water. The riders do not rush blindly. They move with the calm confidence of men who have fought this kind of war for generations, and at their head rides someone the Greeks will soon learn to fear. Mecistius. Even from a distance, he is impossible to miss. The man is enormous, broad-shouldered, and towering over most of the riders around him. His armor is unlike anything the Greek soldiers have seen before. Layer upon layer of scale, and plate covers him from throat to shin. The metal glitters in the sunlight like a moving wall of gold. Even his horse is protected with ornate gear, decorated with polished fittings that flash with every movement. Behind him trails a deep purple cloak that snaps in the wind. He looks less like a cavalry officer and more like a war god riding into battle. When Mecistius reaches the riverbank, he pauses only long enough for the rest of his cavalry to form up behind him. Then the Persians cross. The Aesopus River splashes around the horses' legs as they surge forward, climbing the opposite bank in tight formation. The riders spread out quickly, fanning across the open ground below the Greek position, but they do not charge the Spartans. Mecistius is not reckless. Instead, he studies the Greek line, searching for weakness, and he finds it. The Megarians hold one section of the formation slightly lower on the hillside. Their position offers less natural protection from cavalry charges, and their line is thinner than the heavily packed Spartan ranks. Mecistius turns his horse toward them. With a sharp gesture of his arm, the cavalry follows. The first wave comes fast. Persian riders surge forward, loosing arrows as they approach. The missiles whistle through the air and slam into the Greek shields with dull thuds. Some slip through gaps and strike flesh. Men shout. Shields rise. Before the Greeks can react fully, the horsemen are already upon them. The impact is chaos. Horses crash into the shield wall. Spears stab downward from the saddle. Javelins fly at close range. The Megarian soldiers struggle to keep their formation intact as iron-shod hooves smash against their shields and men are knocked backward by the sheer force of the charge. Then the cavalry withdraws. They wheel away quickly, circling back across the plain. Moments later, they strike again. And again, each attack pounds the same vulnerable section of the Greek line. Arrows rain down from different angles. Horses slam into shields. Riders slash and stab before pulling away. The Megarians begin to break. Men stumble out of formation. Some fall beneath trampling hooves. Others struggle to hold their ground as the relentless pressure of the cavalry tears their line apart piece by piece. Messengers sprint through the Greek camp. Their message to Pausanias is blunt. If reinforcements do not arrive immediately, the Megarian position will collapse. And if that happens, Persian cavalry will pour straight through the gap and roll up the entire Greek army from the flank. Pausanias reacts instantly. The Spartan forces are positioned too far away to reach the threatened sector quickly enough. Instead, he turns toward the Athenians. The Athenians do not hesitate. A selected group of their best heavy infantry grabs their shields and moves toward the battered Megarian line at a running pace. Archers follow behind them, arrows already knocked to their bows. When they arrive, the Athenians push directly into the fight. Shields lock together. Spears extend outward. The cavalry charges again. This time the formation holds. Arrows from the Athenian archers begin to answer the Persian volleys. Horses rear and twist as shafts strike their flanks. Riders shout and maneuver through the tightening chaos. But to the center of it all, Mecistius rides like a storm. His armor turns aside almost every blow. Arrows glance off his plates. Spears scrape across his shield without piercing the layers of metal protecting his body. He crashes into the Greek formation again and again, cutting down soldiers from his saddle, trusting his armor and strength to carry him through. For a while, it works. Greek soldiers begin to whisper, something half in fear and half in disbelief. He cannot be killed. Then fate intervenes in the smallest possible way. During one of the charges, an Athenian spear strikes Mecistius's horse. The blade drives deep into the animal's side. The horse screams. Its front legs buckle violently as it collapses beneath its rider. Mecistius is thrown forward. He slams into the dirt with bone-jarring force. The wind driven from his lungs as the enormous weight of his armor traps him against the ground. For a moment, he tries to rise, but the armor that protected him on horseback now becomes a prison. Before he can regain his footing, the Athenians are on him. They swarm around the fallen commander like wolves that he first. Nothing works. Spears bounce off his armor. Swords scrape uselessly across the plated surface. Mecistius thrashes beneath them, striking with fists and elbows, trying desperately to get back to his feet. But there are too many attackers. They pin him down. Then someone finds the weakness. Not the armor plates themselves, but the narrow gaps between them, the dagger thrusts toward the slit in his helmet. Another blade pushes beneath his arm where the armor joints at a spear point drives toward the seam at his neck. The struggle becomes ugly and brutal in, graceful duel. Just desperate men forcing steel into every tiny opening they can find. Eventually, the giant stops moving. Mecistius lies still in the dust. For a moment, the battlefield goes strangely quiet around the fallen commander. Then the Persians realize what has happened. The response is instant. Cavalry units surge forward in a furious attempt to recover the body. Archers unleash a storm of arrows to cover the attack. The ground erupts into a savage brawl centered on a single corpse. Greek soldiers grab the body and drag it backward. Persian riders push forward, hacking and stabbing to reclaim their commander. Men fall on both sides, but the Greeks hold. Slowly, painfully, they pull the body away from the battlefield. Eventually, the Persian cavalry withdraws. Mecistius is gone. Later that day, the Greeks carry his body through the entire length of their army. Soldiers crowd forward to see him. The man who had seemed invincible only hours earlier now lies stripped of his armor. Pale and lifeless in the dust, the effect is electric. Cheering spreads through the Greek ranks like wildfire. Soldiers who have been trembling under the relentless cavalry attacks now shout with renewed confidence. If Mecistius can die, then no Persian is immortal. Across the river, the mood could not be more different. When the news reaches the Persian camp, shock spreads through the ranks. Mecistius had been admired, even loved by many of the soldiers. His death hits them like a sudden blow to the chest. Men cut their hair in mourning. Even the horses have their manes trimmed short in grief. Inside his command tent, Mardonius receives the report in silence. He has lost more than a skilled commander. He has lost a symbol. But the Persian general does not allow grief to cloud his judgment, because even with Mecistius dead, the Greeks are still trapped. Their supplies are running out. Their water sources are vulnerable. In that moment, the shadow of Leonidas seemed to fill the chamber. The king who had chosen death rather than retreat. The king whose name already lived in legend. Compared to him, the idea of hiding behind a wall felt unbearable. The decision was made quietly, but its consequences would shake the world. Sparta would march, not with a token force, not with a small expedition, with the largest Spartan army ever assembled. Thousands of citizen warriors in crimson cloaks. Tens of thousands of allies from across the Peloponnese. A river of bronze shields and spears flowing north toward the lands already scarred by Persian conquest. And somewhere far away, beyond the ruined cities and the burned fields, the plains near a small town called Plataea waited, because that was where the war would truly end. Not with a heroic last stand, but with a slaughter. And when the armies finally met there, rivers would stop flowing because they were filled with the dead. The order spreads through Sparta without ceremony and no speeches. No dramatic declarations. No crowds cheering in the streets. Just quiet preparation. Shields come down from wooden racks inside Spartan homes. Their bronze surfaces dull from years of training, but still strong enough to stop a spear. Leather straps are tested and tightened. Spearheads are sharpened slowly against whetstones until their edges gleam in the torchlight. For the men of Sparta, war is not something extraordinary. It is routine. Every boy born in a Spartan society has been raised for this exact moment. From childhood, they were taken from their families and thrown into the brutal training system known as the agoge. Hunger, exhaustion, beatings, endless drills with spear and shield. Everything designed to shape them into soldiers who could endure what other men could not. Now those boys are grown, and they are about to march into the greatest battle their civilization has ever faced. The city itself remains strangely calm. Spartan women move through the streets delivering the words that have echoed across generations. Words every Spartan man knows he might hear before war. Return with your shield. Or on IT is not encouragement. It is instruction. Because in Sparta, dropping your shield meant abandoning the line. It meant leaving the man beside you exposed. A Spartan who fled without his shield did not return home in shame. He did not return at all. As the army gathers outside the city, the scale of what Sparta is attempting becomes clear. Nearly the entire citizen warrior class stands assembled. Crimson cloaks ripple in the morning wind. Rows of bronze helmets glint under the rising sun. But the Spartan warriors are only the core of the force. Behind them stand thousands of helots, the state-owned laborers who serve as support troops and attendants. Alongside them come allied contingents from cities across the Peloponnese. Tegeans, Corinthians, Megarians, men who have trained differently, fought differently, lived differently, but now must stand shoulder to shoulder in the same battle line. At the center of it all stands the man who must command them. Pausanias, he is not a king. Not exactly. The throne of Sparta technically belongs to a boy named Pleistarchus, the son of the fallen Leonidas. But the boy is too young to rule, too young even to fight. Until he grows into that role, Pausanias serves as regent, a caretaker of power. But on this campaign, that distinction means nothing. Every decision will be his. Every death will be blamed on him. Every victory will belong to him, or to the ghost of Leonidas standing behind him. When the march finally begins, it does so under the cover of darkness. The Spartan army moves like a living machine. Thousands of sandaled feet striking the earth in steady rhythm. Armor shifting quietly. Leather straps creaking under the weight of weapons. There are no songs and war cries. Only the sound of movement. They pass through the Isthmus of Corinth, where the half-finished defensive wall stands abandoned in the dark. The barrier that was meant to save the Peloponnese now looks almost pathetic in the moonlight, a monument to fear that Sparta has chosen to leave behind. North of that wall lies a land already scarred by Persian occupation, burned farms. Anti-village, roads churned to mud by armies marching back and forth across the same ground. But as the Spartans move deeper into central Greece, something unexpected begins to happen. Other armies join them. In Corinth, soldiers step forward to join the column. In Megara, men who once doubted Sparta now gather their shields and fall into line. In smaller towns scattered across the countryside, leaders face the same impossible decision. Stay home and hope Persia shows mercy or march with Sparta and risk dying in the largest battle the Greek world has ever seen. One by one, they choose to march. The army grows larger every day. Tegeans, Plataeans, Athenians returning from the islands where they sheltered after their city burned. The Athenians arrive not as refugees now, but as soldiers eager for revenge. Their hatred for Persia burns hotter than anything else in the coalition. The road north becomes a river of men. Tens of thousands moving toward the same destination, though few of them truly understand what awaits them there. Somewhere in the middle of that enormous column, Pausanias walks with his officers, studying maps and reports brought by scouts. Every mile north increases the danger. The Persians know they are coming now. Messengers have already reached Mardonius with news that Sparta has left the safety of its wall and marched into the open in the Persian camp. The reaction is immediate. Riders gallop in with urgent reports. Officers gather around the general's tent. Maps are spread across tables. Mardonius listens quietly. He had expected fear. He had expected hesitation. He had not expected Sparta to bring the entire heart of its military north to meet him. But once the surprise fades, something else replaces it. Opportunity. Because if he defeats this army, the war ends. There will be no second Spartan force waiting behind the wall. No reserve army hidden in the Peloponnese. Sparta has committed almost everything. Destroy this army, and Greece collapses as Mardonius begins preparing the battlefield carefully. He studies the terrain surrounding the town of Plataea, a region of rolling plains cut by rivers and broken hills. Perfect ground for the Persian army's greatest advantage: cavalry. Persian horsemen are the finest in the known world. Fast, disciplined, deadly with bows and spears from the saddle. On open ground, they can harass, surround, and destroy slow infantry formations long before those formations ever reach striking distance. But the Greeks know this too. When the Greek army finally arrives near Plataea, Pausanias takes one look at the landscape and immediately understands the trap waiting below. The Persian camp spreads across the far side of the plain like a sprawling city of tents. Thousands of banners flutter above the formations. Endless lines of horses graze behind the camp, and between the two armies lies the Esopus River. If the Greeks charge across that water, they will climb the far bank under a storm of arrows. Before they even form their phalanx properly, Persian cavalry will slam into their flanks and tear them apart. Pausanias refuses to give Mardonius that advantage. Instead, he anchors the Greek army along the broken terrain near the foothills. Uneven ground, rocky slopes, terrain where cavalry cannot build the speed needed to break a shield wall. The two armies stare at each other across the river. Neither side moves. Days begin to pass. The heat grows unbearable. Dust hangs in the air like smoke. Thousands of soldiers stand in formation for hours at a time, watching the enemy lines across the water. The Persians wait for the Greeks to make the mistake. The Greeks wait for the Persians to lose patience. Neither happens. The battlefield transforms into a silent contest of endurance. Soldiers sweat inside their armor. Horses stamp and snort in the heat. Flies swarm over everything, drawn by the smell of unwashed bodies and rotting scraps of food. Small skirmishes erupt along the riverbanks, arrows occasionally flying across the water. But neither army commits to the full assault. The stalemate begins to eat away at the Greek coalition. The wind moves across the plains of Boeotia like a restless animal, pushing dust in slow spirals that crawl along the earth. At first it seems peaceful, almost quiet, the kind of silence that settles before sunrise. But the ground is not empty. Beneath that drifting dust is the memory of thousands of marching feet, the echo of hooves, the deep thunder of an empire moving west. Not long ago, men believed the war had already reached its most heroic moment. They believed the story had ended at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae. 300 Spartans. A king named Leonidas. A wall of shields standing against the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. It was a story perfect for legends. Perfect for songs. But legends have a habit of lying. Because when the last Spartan fell and the bodies of the 300 lay stacked in that choking pass, the war did not end. The Persians did not retreat. They did not hesitate. They marched forward like a flood that had been waiting for the dam to break. Thermopylae was not the end of the invasion. It was the moment the road into Greece opened wide. And the first city to feel what that meant was Athens. When the Persian army reached Attica, the Athenians had already made a desperate decision. Their fleet had carried most of the population away to nearby islands, to cramped harbors and rocky shores where thousands of refugees now waited, staring across the water toward their abandoned home. The city itself was almost empty, but not entirely. Some remained. Old men who refused to leave the temples they had worshipped in their entire lives. Priests who believed the gods would protect the sacred ground of the Acropolis. Citizens who simply had nowhere else to go. When the Persian army arrived, they did not encounter a battle. They encountered a sacrifice. The gates fell quickly. Resistance collapsed in pockets of hopeless fighting. And then the conquerors began their work. Fired. It started slowly at first. A few buildings, a few streets, flames climbing wooden beams like living fingers. But once the wind caught the blaze, Athens transformed into something terrifying. Roofs collapsed inward. Temples that had stood for generations cracked open in showers of sparks. Painted statues of gods and heroes blackened and split apart in the heat. The Parthenon itself burned. Columns glowed red in the night as sacred halls collapsed into blazing ruins. For miles around the countryside, people could see the sky glowing above the city. A constant orange pulse, like a second sun trapped behind the hills. Those who watched from the refugee camps on the islands knew exactly what it meant. Their home was dying. The smell carried across the water. Smoke mixed with something else, something far worse. The thick sweetness of burning flesh. Anyone who breathed that air would remember it for the rest of their life. And while Athens burned, the rest of Greece listened. Messengers staggered into southern cities with the same story over and over again. The Persian army had broken through. The north was lost. The greatest city in Greece had been reduced to ashes. Fear spread faster than any army in Sparta. The news arrived like a hammer blow. The Spartans had lost their king at Thermopylae. Leonidas, the warrior whose name already echoed through every corner of Greece, now belonged to the dead. His body lay somewhere in that mountain pass among the bones of his 300 stories of their stand had already begun to circulate. Men told each other that the Spartans had fought like lions, that they had slaughtered thousands before falling, that the pass itself had run red with Persian blood. But none of those stories changed the simple truth now staring Sparta in the face. The Persians had won, and they were still coming. Inside the Spartan council chambers, the elders studied the maps of Greece with growing dread. Every report from the north painted the same picture. City after city bending the knee or being crushed. Fields burned, roads filled with refugees. The Persian army seemed unstoppable. The Spartans faced a decision that would define their entire civilization. Fight now, or protect what remained. The answer they chose shocked the rest of Greece. Instead of marching north, the Spartans began building a wall. Not a symbolic barrier, not a temporary defense. A massive fortification stretching across the Isthmus of Corinth, the narrow strip of land connecting the Peloponnese to the rest of the Greek mainland. Stone blocks, timber beams, trenches, sharpened stakes hammered into the ground. Thousands of men working day and night to create a barrier that would seal off southern Greece from the Persian advance. From a strategic perspective, it made sense that if the wall held, the Persian army would be trapped outside the Peloponnese. Sparta and its allies could survive behind the barrier. But to the rest of Greece, the message was clear. Sparta had chosen to save itself. Athens, whose people were now homeless and scattered across the sea, saw the wall as a betrayal. Their city had burned while Sparta built defenses. Their people were starving while Sparta stacked stones. And far to the north, in the Persian command tent, a man named Mardonius watched all of this unfold with a quiet, calculating smile. Mardonius was not just another general. He was the strategist Xerxes trusted most, the man left behind in Greece to finish the conquest after the king himself returned east. He understood something the Greeks were only beginning to realize. The alliance between their cities was fragile. Sparta distrusted Athens. Athens resented Sparta. Smaller city-states feared both. The Greeks were not one nation. They were a collection of rivals temporarily united by fear. And Mardonius intended to break that unity. His plan did not begin with another battle. It began with an offer. Envoys left the Persian camp carrying a message straight to the Athenian refugees. The offer was almost unbelievable. Athens could be rebuilt, every temple restored, every farm returned, their democracy allowed to continue untouched. In fact, they could become the most powerful city in Greece with Persian support. All they had to do was accept Persian rule and abandon the alliance with Sparta for the starving refugees living on crowded ships and rocky islands. The proposal hit like lightning. Some immediately rejected it. Persia had burned their home. Accepting the offer felt like surrendering their honor. But others looked at their children, thin from hunger, sleeping under makeshift shelters made of sailcloth and driftwood. Honor did not feed a family. Honor did not rebuild a city. Honor did not stop winter from coming. Arguments broke out across the refugee camps. Families divided. Friends shouting at each other in the night. The future of Greece hanging on a decision that had nothing to do with swords or shields. Eventually, the Athenian leaders made a choice. But before announcing it, they sent one last message south that a delegation traveled to Sparta. They passed the half-built wall at Corinth and entered the Spartan assembly with words sharper than any spear. The message was simple, that if Sparta refused to fight, Athens would accept Persia's offer. The Athenians laid it out with brutal clarity. They had already sacrificed everything. Their city, their homes, their temples. They had burned Athens themselves rather than let Persia claim it intact. And now Sparta hid behind a wall. If the Spartans would not march north, the Athenians would join Persia. Their navy would sail under Persian command. Their knowledge of the Greek coastline would belong to the enemy. And the next time Persian fire came to Greece, it would be Sparta that burned. The Spartan council chamber fell silent. Because everyone in that room understood exactly what the Athenians were saying. This was not a request. It was a threat. And for a civilization that built its entire identity around courage, around the belief that Spartans never retreated and never hid, the accusation cut deeper than any sword. Sparta had a choice: stay behind the wall and lose everything, or march north and face the greatest army the world had ever seen in open battle.